Donnerstein. Recently, the National Institute of Mental Health designated that an understanding of the conditions that lead to sexual attacks against women is a major problem area and requires an increased focus. While there are many potential avenues of investigation, one that seems to be of current concern is the role of media effects in the possible elicitation of such aggressive acts, particularly in the area of pornography. Although the 1970 Presidential Commission on Obscenity and Pornography concluded that there was no evidence of a relationship between exposure to erotic forms of presentations and subsequent aggression, particularly sexual crimes, recent criticisms of these findings have led a number of investigators to re-examine this issue. Specifically, research by a number of individuals in the social psychological area has indicated that under appropriate conditions, exposure to erotic forms of media presentations can facilitate subsequent aggressive behavior. While this research has been directed at the effects of erotic media presentations on behavior, the issue of whether such presentations can in some manner be related to increased aggressive attacks against women has been only recently of concern. It is generally believed by a large proportion of the population that many sexual materials can precipitate violent sexual crimes, such as rape. Basic research directed at examining this concern in regard to erotic forms of media and other presentations that depict women as victims of aggression is an important goal of social research. The present series of studies was designed to examine this issue. Brief historical background. What are the effects of erotic and pornographic materials on antisocial behavior? An examination of recent research and reports in this area would suggest that the effects are, if anything, non-harmful. For example, it is concluded that pornography is an innocuous stimulus which leads quickly to satiation and that the public concern over it is misplaced. If a case is to be made against pornography in 1970, it will have to be made on the grounds other than demonstrated effects of a damaging personal or social nature. Empirical research designed to clarify the question has found no reliable evidence to date that exposure to explicit sexual materials plays a significant role in the causation of delinquent or criminal sexual behavior among youth or adults. However, recent criticisms of these findings by a number of investigators have led to a re-examination of the issue of erotic exposure and subsequent aggressive behavior, while some individuals, like Klein, have argued that there are major methodological and interpretation problems with the Pornography Commission report. Others believe that the observations might be premature. The major reason for this concern comes, in part, from a recent series of experimental studies that suggest that the relationship between exposure to erotic materials and subsequent aggressive behavior is more complex than first believed. The brief review of this research that follows summarizes the current state of this issue. Aggression-enhancing effects of erotic exposure. A number of studies in which subjects have been angered and later exposed to some form of erotic stimulation have revealed increased aggressive behavior. In fact, there is evidence to suggest that the facilitative effects are greater than those attributed to aggressive films. Such findings have been interpreted in terms of a general arousal model, stating that under conditions where aggression is a dominant response, any source of emotional arousal will tend to increase aggressive behavior. In accordance with this model, aggressive behavior in subjects who have previously been angered has been shown to be increased by exposure to arousing sources such as aggressive or erotic films, physical exercise, and noise. It would seem that because of their arousing properties, erotic stimuli can have aggression-facilitating effects under certain conditions. Although there has been research indicating that erotic stimuli might increase aggression without prior anger arousal, the majority of evidence to date would suggest that prior anger arousal is an important condition for a facilitative effect of erotic exposure. Aggression-inhibiting effects of erotic exposure. A second group of studies have shown that exposure to erotic stimuli can actually reduce subsequent aggression. A number of explanations have been suggested for this effect, erotic stimuli are somehow incompatible in their emotional state with aggression. The level of anger arousal is inappropriate for an aggressive response, or erotic exposure shifts attention away from previous anger arousal. Whatever the explanation, there is sound evidence to suggest that under certain conditions, erotic stimuli can reduce subsequent aggressive behavior. A reconciliation of the research. While at first glance such results seem somewhat contradictory, recent studies by Donnerstein et al. And Barron and Bell seem to have resolved this controversy. It is now believed that as erotic stimuli become more arousing, they give rise to increases in aggressive behavior. At a low level of arousal, however, such stimuli act to distract a subject's attention away from previous anger or act as an incompatible response with aggression, thus reducing subsequent aggressive behavior. The evidence for this curvilinear relationship between sexual arousal and aggression seems fairly well established. In fact, Barron has shown that this type of relationship also occurs when females are exposed to mild and highly erotic stimuli. The issue of erotic stimuli and aggression against women. While the current theorizing on the relationship of erotic stimuli and aggression seems fairly conclusive, it is interesting to note that all of the aforementioned studies were concerned with same-sex, primarily male-to-male aggression, yet the social implications of this research would be more applicable by an examination of male aggression toward females, for, as noted by the U.S. Commission on Obscenity and Pornography, it is often asserted that a distinguishing characteristic of sexually explicit materials is the degrading and demeaning portrayal of the role and the status of the human female. It has been argued that erotic materials describe the female as a mere sexual object, to be exploited and manipulated sexually. In recent years, there has been an increase in concern about the relationship of pornography and violence against women. Writers in both the popular media and the scientific community have addressed this issue. Generally, they have taken for granted that pornography and aggression against women are tightly linked. We are somewhat educated now as to the effects of rape on women, but we know less about the effects of pornography. We can admit that pornography is sexist propaganda, no more and no less. Pornography is the theory, and rape is the practice. Pornography is the undiluted essence of anti-female propaganda. Does one need scientific methodology in order to conclude that the anti-female propaganda that permeates our nation's cultural output promotes a climate in which acts of sexual hostility directed against women are not only tolerated but ideologically encouraged? Even when they do not overtly depict scenes of violence and degradation of women at the hands of men, such as rape, beatings, and subordination, the tone is consistently anti-feminist. The intention would seem to be simply to degrade women, and it is noteworthy that in many cases of rape, the men involved either act in the same manner. However, what is the evidence regarding the relationship of pornography and aggression against women? Some studies have attempted to determine whether or not erotica has a differential effect on aggression against men and against women. The general conclusion has been that no differential effects occur. Thus, in one series of studies, Mosher found no increase in sex-calloused attitudes, aggressive verbal remarks, or exploitive sexual behavior toward females. More recent research by Jaff et al. And Barron and Bell have also indicated that erotic exposure does not differentially affect men's aggression towards males or females. There are a number of problems with the research that has examined the link between pornography and male aggression toward females. First, there is strong evidence that prior or subsequent anger instigation is critically important in facilitating aggression following erotic exposure. Given the fact that males are usually hesitant about aggressing against females, and that in the above research, subjects were not even instigated by their potential victim, it would seem unlikely that a differential facilitation in aggression would occur. In fact, except for the Jaff et al. Study, researchers found that exposing non-angered individuals to erotic films tended to reduce aggression or maintain it at a level comparable to that of subjects exposed to a neutral film. Second, previous researchers have found that only under conditions of high sexual arousal does a facilitative effect in aggression occur. Exposure to mild sexually arousing stimuli seems to reduce aggression even in previously angered individuals. Again, except for Jaff et al., the research that has examined the relationship of erotic stimuli and aggression toward females has employed milder forms of sexually arousing stimuli. It would seem, therefore, that an appropriate test of the effects of erotic stimuli on aggression toward females would need to employ both some form of anger instigation and high levels of sexual arousal. This particular combination of important factors, which seems to account for the facilitative effects of erotic stimuli on aggression, has not, until recently, been investigated in those studies in which females are the victims of aggression from males. Experiment 1. A recent study by Donnerstein and Barrett was designed to examine these issues using the theory and data of past research in the erotic stimuli aggression area as a framework. Male subjects were exposed to either a neutral or highly arousing erotic film. The type of erotic stimuli employed was similar to those used in previous studies that have indicated facilitative effects for aggression. In addition, prior to stimulus exposure, subjects were either angered or treated in a neutral manner by a male or female target of aggression. Both aggressive behavior in the form of electric shock and physiological reactions of the subject were observed. Since the procedures in the studies in this series were all similar, a few words regarding the methodology employed are presented. All subjects were male undergraduates who volunteered for the study. As part of receiving extra credit in their coursework, they believed that they were interacting with another male or female subject in a study on the effects of stress and performance. Our male subjects were first given an opportunity to write an essay with the understanding that the essay would be evaluated by the other subject via the delivery of electric shock. If the subject was in a condition where they were to be angered, they received a large number of shocks, plus a negative written evaluation of their essay from the other male or female subject. Non-angered subjects received only one shock and a very positive evaluation. This type of procedure is very common in the literature and produces both physiological responses and self-reports that indicate that subjects have, in fact, been angered. Following this procedure, subjects were then given an opportunity to deliver shock to the subject who had evaluated their essay. No shock was actually delivered, but subjects assumed that they were in fact administering various levels of shock to this person. At various times in the studies, physiological responses of the subjects in the form of blood pressure were measured. It should be noted that in addition to various consent forms that were signed by the subject, a complete debriefing as to the nature of the study was given to the subjects at the end of the session. With this experimental procedure in mind, the first study in this series made a number of predictions based upon previous research in the area. Exposure to erotic films should increase aggressive behavior in angered individuals, while no facilitation in aggressive behavior should occur for non-angered subjects. Of more immediate interest, however, were the following questions. Would exposure to erotic stimuli differentially affect aggression toward males and females in subjects who had previously been instigated to aggress? Might there be an increase in aggression toward females, even without prior instigation, due to implied sexually aggressive cues from the erotic films? And what are the physiological patterns that emerge during film exposure? This third question was of special interest in that from a theoretical perspective, the interaction of anger, arousal, and erotic film exposure arousal have been employed in an explanatory manner in this area. To date, however, such results were based upon interactions with only male targets of aggression. There is a suggestion from prior research that although males display less aggression toward females following provocation, physiological arousal is maintained at a high level. It seemed important, in terms of past research in this area, to examine further not only the arousal component of anger instigation from males to females, but also its interaction with highly arousing sexual stimuli. Donnerstein and Barrett also examined the effects of anger, erotic stimuli, and sex on a more pro-social or rewarding response. Since it was expected that less social restraints would be present with this reward response than with the shock response toward females, subjects were given an opportunity in this study to administer rewards money to their target. The major results for this first study are presented in tables 1 and 2. With regard to aggression, as measured by the intensity and durations of shocks administered to the male or female, 2 interactions were found. The first, anger by sex of target, indicated that angered subjects were more aggressive than non-angered subjects, and that subjects angered by a male were more aggressive than those angered by a female. The second, anger by films, indicated that under non-anger conditions, there were no effects for the films shown, but when subjects were angry, the erotic film increased aggression. Thus, when subjects were exposed to highly arousing erotic stimuli, there was a possibility for aggression to be facilitated. More important to the discussion is the fact that no differential aggression was observed toward females as a function of film exposure. In fact, as has been the case in past studies, less aggression was administered to the female targets. Does this imply, therefore, that erotic films do not influence aggression towards females as suggested by the Pornography Commission? The physiological data obtained in this study would suggest that perhaps another process was operating with angered subjects. The blood pressure data indicated that higher levels of arousal were obtained with a female rather than a male target after erotic exposure, and that this arousal was still present after aggressing. It might have been expected, therefore, that aggression would have been higher toward females than males. Results, however, tended to indicate just the opposite. Under anger conditions, females were aggressed against less than males. It is interesting to note that Taylor and Epstein also found increased physiological arousal in male subjects who were less aggressive toward a female target under attack conditions. One possible explanation for this type of finding, suggested by Dengerick, is that aggression towards females is generally disapproved of, and that this fear of disapproval could act to inhibit aggression. Further evidence that males were inhibited from acting aggressively toward female targets in this study was suggested by the reward data. Under anger conditions, a reduction in reward was found for females. It would seem reasonable to suggest that in the context of this study, changes in rewarding behavior would carry less social restraints than delivery of a noxious stimulus toward a female. If these results were a function of inhibitions toward aggressing against females, then conditions allowing for a reduction of inhibitions might reveal differential aggression toward males and females as a function of erotic exposure. Experiment 2. The purpose of this experiment was to create a condition in which male subjects would be less inhibited or restrained against aggressing toward a female in order to examine the effects that erotic exposure would have upon such aggression. While there are many potential strategies to reduce aggressive inhibitions, e.g. aggressive models, the present study adopted a similar situation to that employed by Green, Stonner, and Shope. These investigators found that when subjects were given 2 opportunities to aggress against an anger instigator, aggression was higher than in a condition in which subjects were not given this initial aggression opportunity. Furthermore, subjects in the double aggression condition reported less restraints against aggressing than individuals in all other conditions. Additional support for this increase in aggression, following an initial opportunity to aggress, has been provided by a number of investigators. In the context of the present experiment, it was hypothesized that allowing male subjects an initial opportunity to aggress against a female would act to reduce any aggression inhibitions present. If erotic films are capable of facilitating aggression against females, then the present experiment, by incorporating both anger instigation and highly erotic films, in addition to a reduction in inhibitions, should allow for a more judicious test of this possibility. In this study, male subjects were angered by a male or female target prior to being placed into one of 3 film conditions. Before being given an opportunity to aggress, subjects viewed either a highly erotic film, aggressive film, or no film. After having one opportunity to aggress against the male or female target, subjects waited 10 minutes and were given a second opportunity to aggress. The results of the present study, as seen in Figure 1, would suggest that highly erotic films can act to increase aggressive responses against females under certain conditions. Figure 1, mean shock intensity as a function of film conditions, sex of target, and time of aggression. So on the y-axis is mean shock intensity from 2 to 7, and then it's time jumped, so we have after film, and it's divided also into after 10-minute delay, and on the x-axis are the film conditions, aggressive, erotic, or no. So directly after the film, you can see that the shock intensity toward a male is the highest at 5 after the aggressive film, and it's only 4 toward females after the aggressive film. And then in the erotic film, actually, they do shock women at 4 and men only at about 3.7. So that's interesting. And then they shock them at the same rate when there's no stimulus. And then after a 10-minute delay, again, they shock men more at about a 6 for aggressive movie, and females less than that, about a 4.3. And then for an erotic movie, wow, they shock the females way more after a 10-minute delay at 6, and the men only at 4. And then it's the same lower shock level of about 3.2 for no stimuli. The results of the present study, as seen in Figure 1, would suggest that highly erotic films can act to increase aggressive responses against females under certain conditions. When male subjects were given an opportunity to aggress immediately following film exposure, it was found that highly erotic films did increase aggression beyond that of the no film controls. This finding corroborates those of other investigators who have found that highly arousing erotica can act as a facilitator of aggression in previously angered individuals. In addition, it was found that during this initial aggression opportunity, there was no differential aggression toward males or females. These results are also supportive of previous studies that have indicated no sex of target effects following erotic exposure. However, when male subjects were given a second opportunity to aggress against the target 10 minutes later, aggressive responses were increased against female targets. This finding of an increase in aggression against women in the delayed condition is the first demonstration that this effect can, in fact, occur.